The deputy, standing at the edge of Blacktail Ridge, couldn't stop staring at the camera. Not the photographer, the camera itself. A Nikon FE, analog film still loaded, half buried in scree at 8,200 feet. September 1998. 2 years after Martin Howell went missing from this same stretch of wilderness, and the camera had just surfaced after a season of heavy runoff. The lens cap was still on. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy deep, real-world investigations. Deputy Rachel Kern crouched low, her knees pressing into the loose shale. She'd been with Cascade County Search and Rescue since 1992, but this was different. The camera sat at an angle that made no sense, wedged beneath a flat slab of granite, protected from the elements but positioned as though someone had deliberately hidden it. She radioed down to the staging area without touching it, her voice breaking static across the VHF handset. "Base, this is Kern. I've got possible evidence. Grid F7, request forensics and documentation." The response crackled back within seconds. Sheriff Tom Braddock's voice was steady, but edged with something sharper. "Hold position, don't touch anything, we're coming up." Martin Howell had been 34 years old when he disappeared in August 1996. A freelance wilderness photographer from Bozeman, he told his partner he was heading into the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex for a 10-day solo shoot. He'd done it dozens of times before. Always alone, always meticulous. He carried topographic maps, a compass, water purification tablets, and enough freeze-dried meals to last 2 weeks. His truck, a 1989 Ford Ranger, was found at the trailhead on August 19, 1996. The keys were under the floor mat where he always left them. His permit was clipped to the rearview mirror. He never came back. The initial search lasted 17 days. Cascade County coordinated with the Forest Service, deploying K-9 units, helicopters, and ground teams that covered over 60 square miles of terrain. They found nothing, no pack, no tent, no body. The case went cold by October 1996, filed away as a presumed wilderness fatality, one of hundreds across Montana's vast backcountry. Then the camera appeared. Sheriff Braddock arrived at the ridge 2 hours later, accompanied by forensic technician Alan Durst and a photographer from the county lab. The afternoon light was fading fast, casting long shadows across the Taylor's field. Durst set up a tripod and began documenting the scene with a 35mm camera, shooting from multiple angles before anyone touched the Nikon. "Film's still inside," Durst said, peering through a jeweler's loop at the camera's frame counter. "Looks like 23 exposures. Out of 36. Braddock knelt beside Kern. "Same spot we searched in 96. "Within 200 yards, she said. "We covered this grid 3 times. K-9 team passed through here on day 4. "Then how did we miss it?" Kern shook her head slowly. "We didn't. It wasn't here." Durst carefully lifted the camera with gloved hands, inspecting the underside. The metal casing showed minimal weathering, unusual for something exposed to 2 Montana winters. He placed it in a padded evidence bag, sealing it with red tape and marking the time, 16:47 hours. "We need to process this film immediately," Braddock said. "If there's anything on those frames, it might tell us what happened." Back at the county lab in Great Falls, Durst worked under safe light conditions, unspooling the 35mm film in complete darkness. The negatives were developed using standard Kodak chemistry, then hung to dry in a lightless drying cabinet. It took 6 hours before the first contact sheet was ready. What they saw changed everything. The first 12 frames showed standard wilderness photography, a meadow at dawn, a bull elk drinking from a creek, close-ups of wildflowers. Professional quality, the kind of work Howell was known for. Then frame 13, a dense forest interior, the composition slightly off-center as though the shot had been taken in haste. Frame 14, The same forest, but closer. A shadow visible between two lodgepole pines. Frame 15, a human figure, distant, partially obscured by branches. Braddock leaned over Durst's shoulder, studying the contact sheet under magnification. "Can you enlarge that?" Durst nodded, selecting frame 15 and projecting it onto photographic paper. The image emerged slowly in the developing tray, revealing details invisible to the naked eye on the negative. The figure was male, wearing dark clothing. His posture suggested movement, not standing still, but walking with purpose. His face was turned away from the camera. "That's not Howell," Kern said quietly. She'd worked the original case, seen hundreds of photos of the missing man. Howell was 5'10", maybe 160 pounds. This guy's bigger, 6 feet, easily. Frame 16 showed the same figure, now closer, still too distant for facial identification, but the build was unmistakable. Frame 17 was blurred, as if the camera had moved suddenly during exposure. Frames 18 through 23 were black, completely unexposed. "He stopped shooting," Durst said, mid-roll. "Why would he do that?" Braddock stood back from the table, arms crossed. "Because something made him stop." The investigation reopened officially on September 4th, 1998. Braddock assembled a task force that included Kern, Durst, and 2 experienced trackers from the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks. They returned to Blacktail Ridge with updated topographic maps and instructions to grid search a 5-mile radius from the camera's location. On the 3rd day, tracker Lewis Carmond found something. It was a boot print, preserved in a patch of dried mud beneath an overhang where rain couldn't reach. The tread pattern was distinct. Vasque Sundowner, size 11. Howell wore size 9. The print was photographed from multiple angles, measured and cast in dental plaster. The depth suggested someone carrying significant weight, either gear or something heavier. "How old?" Braddock asked. Carmond crouched low, studying the fracture lines in the dried mud. "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be 2 years. This spot stays protected." They followed the terrain downslope, moving methodically through thick timber. The forest here was older growth, the canopy dense enough to block most sunlight. Kern marked their path with flagging tape, noting coordinates every 100 yards in a waterproof logbook. At 14:20 hours, they found the second camera. This one was a Canon AE-1, partially buried under decomposing pine needles. No film inside. The serial number had been filed off, but the body showed signs of impact damage, a crack along the viewfinder housing, the lens mount bent at an unnatural angle. "Someone smashed it," Durst said, turning the camera carefully. "Deliberately." Braddock radioed back to base, requesting additional personnel. By nightfall, 12 searchers were working the area in rotating shifts, using portable halogen lamps powered by gas generators. They found no other evidence that day, but Carmond insisted they were close to something. "The placement is wrong," he told Braddock over coffee at 02 hours. "Both cameras found within half a mile of each other, but in spots that don't match Howell's known routes. He was a photographer. He followed light drainage patterns, animal trails. These locations are random." "Unless someone else put them there," Kern said. The words hung in the cold mountain air. "Would you have made the same call if you'd been in their place?" On September 8, 1998, the search expanded to include cadaver dogs. 2 Belgian Malinois, trained specifically for wilderness recovery, were brought in from Missoula. The dogs worked independently, each with a handler, covering separate grids to avoid contamination. At 11:15 hours, both dogs alerted simultaneously. The location was a ravine choked with deadfall timber, approximately 3 miles northeast of where the Nikon had been found. The handlers signaled for the team to hold position while they cleared a path through the tangle of fallen lodgepole. The smell reached them before they saw anything, not overpowering but unmistakable. They found Martin Howell's body at 12:03 hours. He was wedged beneath a massive pine trunk that had collapsed at some point during the previous winter. The body was in advanced stages of decomposition, most soft tissue consumed by scavengers and weather. But the skeleton remained largely intact, still wearing a torn Columbia jacket and hiking boots. A Kelty backpack lay 10 feet away, partially crushed by the same tree. Braddock ordered the scene secured immediately. No one approached the remains until the county medical examiner arrived by helicopter at 14:30 hours. Dr. Sarah Pennington had been the county ME since 1989, a veteran of dozens of wilderness recoveries. She worked in silence for 90 minutes, photographing the body from every angle, documenting the position, measuring distances. Finally, she stood and pulled off her gloves. "This wasn't an accident," she said. Everyone stopped moving. Pennington pointed to the skull. "Depressed fracture, right parietal bone. Blunt force trauma. The impact pattern is consistent with something cylindrical, maybe a branch or a tool, but here's what's important. The fracture edges show no sign of healing. This happened perimortem, at or very near the time of death." Kern stepped closer. "Could the tree have caused it when it fell?" "No, the angle is wrong. The blow came from above and slightly behind, directed downward. If the tree crushed him, we'd see compression fractures across multiple bones. This is a single focused impact." Braddock felt his jaw tighten. "Homicide." Pennington nodded slowly. "I'll confirm it after the autopsy, but based on what I'm seeing here, yes. Someone struck him hard enough to fracture the skull. Whether that killed him outright or incapacitated him, I can't say yet, but this was not environmental." The backpack was carefully removed and opened on site. Inside, a sleeping bag, water bottles, energy bars, and a first aid kit. No wallet, no identification. But tucked into a side pocket, wrapped in a plastic Ziploc bag, they found a small spiral notebook. Kern opened it carefully. The pages were damp but legible, filled with Howell's handwriting, dates, locations, lighting notes, standard field journal entries. The last entry was dated August 11th, 1996. "Saw someone near the upper fork, didn't recognize him. Strange to see anyone this far in, kept his distance, probably another photographer. Will move camp tomorrow to avoid crossing paths." Beneath that, in different ink, shakier handwriting, "He's following me." The autopsy took place the following morning at Great Falls Regional Medical Center. Pennington worked with 2 assistants, documenting every finding with Polaroid photographs and handwritten notes. The skull fracture was confirmed, a single depressive injury measuring 2 centimeters in diameter, consistent with blunt force trauma delivered by a smooth cylindrical object. But there was something else. "Look at this," Pennington said, pointing to the left femur. A small nick in the bone, barely visible. She examined it under magnification, then cross-referenced with a metallurgical database she kept in 3-ring binders. Tool mark, steel blade, probably a knife. "He was stabbed," Braddock asked. "Post-mortem, after he was already dead or dying. Someone cut him, but not to kill, to search." Kern frowned. "Search for what?" Pennington pointed to the ribs. 3 more shallow marks, all on the left side. "These are hesitation cuts. Someone was looking for something they thought might be hidden under his clothing or in a pocket. They didn't know exactly where, so they kept cutting until they found it. Or didn't." The clothing was examined separately. The jacket had been sliced open along the inner lining. The pants' pockets had been turned inside out. Even the boots had been partially unlaced, the tongues pulled back. "He was carrying something," Braddock said. "Something worth killing for." Durst spread the developed photographs from Howell's Nikon across a conference table. He'd made in large prints of every usable frame, especially the ones showing the unidentified figure. Using a jeweler's loupe, he studied the man's clothing, looking for any identifying detail. "There," he said, tapping frame 16. "On his belt. That's a radio pouch. VHF handset. Standard Forest Service issue." Kern leaned in. Forest Service. Or someone who wanted to look like Forest Service. Braddock made a call to the regional office in Missoula. It took 2 days to get the records, but when they arrived, they confirmed what he'd suspected. No official personnel were assigned to that sector during August 1996. The area was designated wilderness, no motorized vehicles, no permanent staff presence except seasonal fire lookouts. "So either he stole the radio," Kern said, "or he worked for the Forest Service at some point and kept the gear." They cross-referenced personnel records going back 5 years. 17 names came up. Seasonal workers, contractors and volunteers who'd cycled through the Bob Marshall complex between 1991 and 1996. Most were still employed or easily located, but one name stood out. Garrett Finch, wilderness technician, seasonal contract, 1993-1994. Terminated in October 1994 for unspecified behavioral issues. Last known address, Choteau, Montana. No current contact information. Braddock ran Finch's name through state and federal databases. No criminal record, no registered vehicles, no tax filings after 1995. It was as if he'd vanished. "Get me a photograph," Braddock said. The personnel file included a photocopy of Finch's employee ID from 1994. The image was grainy but clear enough. A man in his late 20s, heavy build, dark hair, angular features. Kern compared it to the enlarged frames from Howell's camera. "It could be him," she said. "Height and build match. But the photo quality isn't good enough for confirmation." They needed more. Braddock sent Kern and Durst back to Blacktail Ridge with instructions to re-examine the entire area using the new information. If Finch had been following Howell, there might be additional evidence, camps, caches, anything that suggested prolonged presence. On September 14th, they found the shelter. It was tucked into a rock alcove a quarter-mile from where Howell's body had been discovered. A crude structure built from deadfall timber and pine boughs, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Inside, a canvas tarp, empty cans of Dinty-Moore stew, a rusted Coleman stove, and a green military surplus duffel bag. The duffel contained clothing, a sleeping bag, and a Motorola VHF radio, exactly the model issued to Forest Service personnel in the mid-1990s. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in an oil-stained T-shirt, they found a camera. Not just any camera. A Nikon F3, professional grade, with a telephoto lens attached. The serial number matched one reported stolen from a wildlife photographer in Glacier National Park in July 1996, a month before Howell disappeared. Durst processed the camera immediately. The film inside had been exposed and rewound, but never developed. He took it back to the lab and worked through the night. The prints that emerged told the story. Dozens of photographs, all of Martin Howell. Long-range surveillance shots, Howell setting up camp, Howell cooking over a fire, Howell sleeping in his tent. The time-stamps on the negatives confirmed they'd been taken over a 3-day period in early August 1996. Whoever took these had been stalking him. The final frame on the roll showed something different. It was shot from a low angle, looking up at Howell's face. His expression was frozen in shock, his hands raised defensively. The composition suggested the photographer had been standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch. Pennington examined the print under magnification. "The lighting is wrong for midday. This was taken near dusk. You can see the shadow gradient across his face." Braddock checked the journal entry again. August 11th. the day Howell wrote about being followed. "This was taken hours before he died," Braddock said quietly. The search for Garrett Finch became a manhunt. State troopers, federal agents, and county deputies coordinated across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Finch's photograph was distributed to ranger stations, post offices, and small-town sheriffs. A tip line was established. The case made regional news, sparse coverage, but enough to generate leads. On September 22nd, a motel clerk in Browning called the hotline. A man matching Finch's description had checked in 2 days earlier, paying cash, no vehicle. He'd left that morning without checking out. Deputies arrived within the hour. The room had been cleaned, but forensic technicians found a receipt in the trash, dated September 20th, from a hardware store in Cut Bank. Purchase, duct tape, contractor bags, and a folding shovel. Braddock felt his stomach drop. They traced the route north. Cut Bank was 40 miles from Browning, near the Canadian border. If Finch was running, he had options. Back roads, wilderness crossings, places where no one would think to look, but he didn't run. On September 24th, a forestry crew working near Hart Butte reported a man camping illegally in a restricted fire zone. When a ranger approached, the man fled on foot into thick timber. The ranger radioed for backup. Cascade County deployed a tactical team. They surrounded the area and waited. At 18:45 hours, Garrett Finch walked out of the trees with his hands raised. He was arrested without incident. No weapons, no resistance. He looked thin, exhausted, older than his 32 years. When deputies searched his campsite, they found a notebook identical to the one Howell had carried. Same brand, same size. Inside, pages of handwritten confessions. Finch waived his right to an attorney. He wanted to talk. The interview took place in a windowless room at Cascade County Detention Center. Braddock and Kern sat across from him, a cassette recorder running on the table between them. Finch stared at his hands, speaking in a monotone. "I didn't mean to kill him," he said. "I just wanted the photos." "What photos?" Braddock asked. Finch looked up, his eyes hollow. "The lynx." Martin saw a Canada lynx up near Moose Creek. He told someone at a ranger station. Word got around. "I'd been trying to photograph one for 3 years. I thought if I followed him, he'd lead me to it." Kern kept her voice even. "So you followed him into the backcountry?" "Yeah, for days. I knew the terrain better than he did, stayed out of sight, but he figured it out, wrote about it in his journal. That spooked me." "What happened on August 11th? Finch's jaw tightened. "I confronted him. Told him I just wanted to see where the lynx was. He got angry. Said I was trespassing, stalking him. He threatened to report me to the Forest Service. I told him I didn't work there anymore. He didn't care. Said he'd call the sheriff when he got back." Braddock leaned forward. "So you hit him?" Finch nodded slowly. "I had a tent pole, aluminum. He turned to walk away, and I swung it. Didn't think. Just reacted. He went down hard. I checked his pulse. Nothing. Then you searched his body. I panicked. I thought maybe he had the film on him, the lynx shots. I cut open his jacket, checked his pockets. There was nothing. His camera was gone. I don't know where." Kern glanced at Braddock. "The Nikon they'd found on Blacktail Ridge. Howell must have hidden it before the confrontation, sensing danger." "What did you do with the body?" Braddock asked. "I dragged him into the ravine, covered him with branches. A tree fell during a storm that winter. Pinned him down. I thought no one would find him." "And the cameras we found?" Finch exhaled slowly. "The Canon was mine. I dropped it running away that night. Smashed it so no one could trace it. The Nikon, I went back a month later. Found it under a rock where Martin must have hidden it. I kept it. Stupid. I should have destroyed it too." Braddock kept his face neutral. "Why'd you leave it at Blacktail Ridge?" "I didn't. I buried it near my old camp. Runoff must have moved it. I heard you guys found it. That's when I knew it was over. The interview lasted 4 hours. Finch recounted every detail: the stalking, the killing, the panicked cover-up. He signed a written confession at 23 hours. In October 1998, Garrett Finch was charged with second-degree murder. He pled guilty in December and was sentenced to 40 years in Montana State Prison. He never saw the links. The evidence was catalogued and stored. Howell's remains were cremated at his family's request. The photographs, both his and Finch's, were entered into the county archive, preserved as part of the case file. Braddock stood on Blacktail Ridge one last time in late October 1998, watching the first snow settle across the peaks. The case was closed, but something still nagged at him: the randomness of it. A man dead over photographs of an animal he never got to see. A killer who threw his life away over jealousy and panic. Kern joined him, her breath fogging in the cold. "You think he's telling the truth about not meaning to kill him?" Braddock shrugged. "Does it matter? Martin's still dead. Finch still swung that pole." "Yeah," she said quietly. "I guess so." They walked back down the trail in silence, the wind erasing their bootprints behind them. The Nikon FE that started everything was eventually returned to Howell's partner. She never opened it, never looked at the developed prints. She donated it to a photography museum in Bozeman, where it sits in a display case with a small plaque: Martin Howell, 1962-1996, wilderness photographer. The Canada lynx he was tracking was never photographed. To this day, sightings in that region remain rare, elusive, ghost-like, a shadow moving through the pines. What would you have done differently? If you appreciate real investigations like this one, subscribe and stay curious.